Have you ever been treated like a burden in the house you built yourself? Have you ever felt the bitter taste of humiliation from someone you raised with so much love? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. After decades dedicating my life to my family, I was invited to sleep on the living room floor. That's right, on the floor. With a thin blanket and a pillow that felt more like a folded cloth. And all because, according to my daughter-in-law, the room was Emily's. Her granddaughter took priority. I, the grandmother, the woman who helped build those walls with the sweat of my labor, became an unwelcome guest. That night, lying on the cold floor, I heard laughter coming from the next room. They had no idea I could still hear everything. My son said nothing, not a word in my defense. And there, in that silent darkness, with my body aching, and my heart even more so, something inside me changed. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because this story doesn't end with tears. It begins with them. For years, I was the first to wake up, the last to sleep. I made breakfast, did laundry, and cared for the grandchildren so my children could work. I never complained. Like so many other grandmothers, I just wanted to be useful, to be remembered with affection and respect. But what did I get in return? Indifference, coldness, contempt. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that, after a certain age, your voice no longer matters? This story is more than humiliating. It's a lesson in respect for grandparents, in how life demands, sooner or later, the actions we take. It's about what happens when children forget the sacrifices their parents made, when the wisdom of old age is ignored, when dignity is tossed aside like old furniture on the porch. I know I'm not alone. Many people will recognize themselves in this story, because, unfortunately, real stories of humiliated grandmothers are repeated everywhere. And that's why I ask you, stay with me until the end. You need to hear every detail, not only because you'll understand what happened the next day, when everyone woke up and realized the furniture was gone, but because perhaps this story will also help you see things in your own family. What began as pain and abandonment turned into a profound lesson, a turning point neither they nor you expected. And it all began that night, when they told me I no longer had a place in the room that had once been mine. That night, as I huddled under a thin blanket, pretending the cold didn't hurt, I mentally reviewed every moment of my life. I remembered the sleepless nights sewing uniforms to pay for my son's school fees, the lunches I'd skip so he'd have more, all the times I'd choked back tears to smile, because being a mother and then a grandmother was, for me, the most beautiful mission God could give anyone. And yet, there I was, treated like a burden, like someone who only got in the way. That's why, if at any point in this story you felt a tightness in your chest, or remembered your own mother, your grandmother, or even yourself, comment here. Tell us what touched you most, what revolted you, what made you think. Each comment here isn't just an opinion, it's an embrace, a testament that our stories deserve to be told, that our voices will no longer be silenced. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you believe that real stories like this need to be seen, heard, and felt, then like this video. It really helps spread this message to more people, people who might be experiencing exactly this right now, in silence. And if you want to continue following stories like this, true, moving, full of lessons, and just to subscribe to the channel, that's what keeps this space alive. A place where the wisdom of old age isn't discarded, where pain is transformed into strength, and where each view can touch a heart that had been forgotten. Because that morning, lying on the floor of the house I helped build, I had no idea that the biggest turnaround of my life was about to happen. My name is Louise. I'm 78 years old, a widow, the mother of an only child, and I've sewn for over 4 decades. I don't have a diploma hanging on my wall, nor have I traveled extensively around the world. But I've done something I consider even greater. I've built a family. And perhaps that's why it's so difficult to accept what happened. My life was made of small silences and many sacrifices. While everyone slept, I embroidered. While they celebrated, I cooked. I never asked for much, just that they look me in the eye as someone who still matters. Lately, not even that. In that house where I now hear only distant voices, there was a time when my laughter filled the rooms. I sewed my son's clothes, mended my granddaughter's dolls, made soup when someone sneezed. And yet, in recent years, I've become invisible. It started subtly. The food I prepared was left aside. Decisions began to be made without my knowledge. Then came the stares, the kind that tells you nothing, but also doesn't see you. The morning before that night on the floor, I was in the kitchen. The house had already woken up, and still, no one said good morning to me. I washed the breakfast dishes, folded my granddaughter's clothes, and left everything tidy on the edge of the bed. I sat for a while on the porch, as I always did, waiting for someone to notice me, perhaps come over to talk. But what I heard was the sound of the door closing from the inside, leaving me outside, with memories for company. Do you know that feeling when you realize you're no longer a priority? That you've become a supporting character in your own story? It's a feeling that's hard to explain, as if we're present, but blurred like an old photograph no one wants to frame anymore. In my daughter-in-law's eyes, I was just another responsibility. In my son's, perhaps a nuisance he couldn't handle. And yet, I stayed there. Because deep down, I still believed that love could be rediscovered, that respect could be relearned. But life sometimes teaches us harshly what we insist on ignoring. I'm no saint. I've had flaws, like everyone else. But I know what I've given up. I know how much I've sacrificed so others could shine. And, as sad as it may sound, this is also a journey of transformation. Sometimes, the hidden truth about who we are only emerges when everything is taken from us. It was there, in that daily routine of dishes being washed and doors being closed in my face, that I realized the silent impact I could still make. I didn't shout, I didn't demand, but my eyes spoke volumes. They held the pain of someone who saw their story pushed into the corner. And even in silence, I observed every gesture, every slight, every word spoken with disdain. And in that silence, a decision was born, something that would completely change what would come next. If you got this far, and this story touched something inside you, WRITE, the word here in the comments of Visiboff, she carries more than what meets the eye. I can still hear her voice, clear, cold, and precise. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a confrontation, it was just a phrase thrown out as if to say anything. She can sleep on the rug, it's Emily's room. At that moment, my heart froze. It was as if each word carried the weight of a door closing in front of me. I don't know if it was the indifferent tone or the certainty with which she said it, but something inside me snapped. I was there, standing in the hallway, a washcloth in my hands, when I heard it. She didn't even know I was nearby, or maybe she did, and that's precisely why she spoke so loudly. Betrayal, sometimes, doesn't come in disguise. It comes out wide, as if to say, you no longer belong here. I stood there for a few seconds, a silence so thick it seemed to glue me to the ground. My son didn't respond. He didn't contradict her. His silence, in that moment, was even crueler than her words. It was a silent agreement, an acceptance of it all as if it were natural. And it was in that instant that I understood. I was no longer welcome, not there, not anywhere in that house. I spent the rest of the day like a ghost present, but ignored. I folded my granddaughter's clothes, organized her toys on the floor, made tea as usual. No one thanked me. No one even noticed. That night, they left a blanket in the corner of the living room, without saying anything, and then I got the message. You sleep here, on the floor, like someone who's no longer part of the family. For hours I lay, my eyes open in the darkness, listening to footsteps in the hallway, the creaking of beds, the clicking of doors. It was all so symbolic. Each sound seemed to reinforce the message. Your time is up. But while they slept, I thought. I reviewed scenes, memories, decisions. There were no tears, not anymore. What I felt was something deeper, a mixture of disappointment, lucidity, and a certain kind of awakening. The hidden truth is that we spend years ignoring signs, trying to preserve bonds that have already been broken. But there comes a point when remaining silent is a betrayal of ourselves. I was no longer that woman content to be a supporting character. Something had changed. The pain was still there, but now it had a purpose. It was the kind of pain that transforms, that drives away fear. It forces us to make decisions that once seemed impossible. I remembered a time when my son was little and would hug me tightly, telling me he'd never leave me alone. I remembered the smiles that once filled that house. I remembered who I was, and, more importantly, who I could still be. Because no one, no matter how old, loses their right to dignity. Deep down, I knew that phrase, "let her sleep on the rug," was more than a humiliation. It was a turning point, an invisible boundary between before and after. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. What began as a visit to see my granddaughter was about to turn into something much bigger, something that would change not only how they saw me, but more importantly, how I would come to see myself. If this part of the story also reminded you of something that was kept for a long time, write the word here in the comments. Wake. That's what's missing. A moment of lucidity to see everything as it really is. That morning, something inside me broke the silence of years. It wasn't a burst of rage, nor a scream. It was a decision, silent, serene, but definitive. For the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. I didn't shrink. I observed every detail, every gesture. The way my daughter-in-law walked past me without even moving her eyes, my son's gaze, always fleeting, as if he himself couldn't handle the guilt he carried. It was like watching a play based on my own story, with everyone pretending I was no longer part of the scene. And there, lying on the cold floor, my body tired but my mind awake, I understood that my journey wasn't over. It was simply changing direction. There are moments in life when there's no turning back, when you reach the limit of your pain and realize you need to get out of there, not necessarily the house, but the position they've agreed to place you in. What hurt me wasn't the floor I slept on, but the metaphor for it, the way it symbolized, the place they believed I deserved to occupy. And it was right there, with no one around, that something blossomed. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I began to think differently. My gaze, which had previously sought affection, now sought understanding. Every gesture, every idle phrase, every whispered word in the hallway, absorbed it all, and for the first time in a long time, I saw more than met the eye. It was as if I were finally behind the scenes of that family, seeing the workings behind appearances. The hidden truth, the one we spend years ignoring out of love, now stared me in the face. I had been useful, then tolerated, and now expendable. That was how they saw me. But that didn't mean I was dot in the following days. I maintained my routine. I tidied the house, made lunch, smiled at my granddaughter. But inside, I grew stronger. Each task completed was a reaffirmed decision. I knew they didn't notice, and that was precisely what gave me an advantage. When you're underestimated, no one imagines what you're capable of. My transformation wouldn't be made of shouting or fussing. It would be made of strategy, of silent choices that would change everything. The change in mindset happened gradually. I stopped trying to please. I began to observe more closely. I began to notice the weak points in that act. The overdue bills my daughter-in-law hid, my son's suspicious look when she mentioned the new car, the hidden nervousness when I walked into the office. Small signs, I just had to connect them. And, most importantly, I began to remember my own resources. The house was still in my name. I still had documents saved, trusted contacts, stories they didn't even know. For years, I had managed my own life, even without a degree, even without recognition. And now, all that strength was returning. It was like rediscovering who I'd always been, only now, with more wisdom and much less fear. They thought I was shrinking. But what they didn't know was that I was preparing myself. Because there's a kind of strength that only emerges when everything around you tries to diminish you. A strength that comes from the soul. From a woman who's fallen before, but always gotten back up. And now, it was no different. If you've also experienced a moment where you needed to reinvent yourself in silence, write the word here in the comments. Invisible force. Sometimes it is precisely she who saves us. From the moment I realized I was no longer considered part of that household, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation. It was strategy. I began walking slower, speaking less, feigning confusion. I discovered that, for some people, an older woman with a failing memory is synonymous with uselessness. And they believed me. That was the advantage. Because while they thought I was forgetting, I was recording everything. I didn't need to say anything, I just watched. I, who had been the caretaker for so long, became the behind-the-scenes observer. Every detail I'd previously ignored now became a piece of a puzzle that, little by little, I began to piece together. The house contract was still in my name. I remembered where I kept the documents. The deed, the proof of purchase, everything was there, well organized, just the way I'd always been. I started photographing the paperwork. I made copies. I scanned it onto my granddaughter's phone, which she'd left unlocked on the couch. I saved it to my own email address, a new one, unknown to anyone. I started recording conversations, disguised as an inattentive old woman. I'd keep my cell phone in my apron pocket. When they started talking quietly in the kitchen, I'd just stand there, drying an already dry plate, pretending not to hear, while everything was recorded. The first recording was of a conversation between them about selling the house and using the money to pay off debts. "If she dies soon, we'll sort it out quickly," my daughter-in-law said, laughing. My son didn't respond. He just continued drinking his coffee as if it were natural. It was like being slapped in the chest, but I kept my gaze calm. My eyes said less than they felt, and that was exactly what I needed. Each recording was a piece of the hidden truth they didn't know I knew. I started going out for walks, but in reality, I was going to the pharmacy, where an old friend still worked. He printed out old bank statements for me and helped me schedule a legal consultation online, leaving no trace. I needed to understand how far I could go, and the more I researched, the more I realized the house was still rightfully mine. Nothing had been transferred, nothing notarized, despite all the years they'd used each room as their own. These revelations gave me breath. The woman who had slept on the floor was not the same woman who now walked lightly through the house. I listened more than I spoke. Every whisper was a clue, and it was in this silent listening that I discovered that, for months, they had been planning to sell the furniture, renovate part of the house, and put it up for sale before I lost my sanity. But the sanity, ironically, had never been so clear. There was something powerful in feigning fragility. I realized how others reveal their true colors when they think you no longer understand. But I did, and everything was carefully guarded. The transformation that began as pain now became a kind of power. Not the kind that screams or imposes, but the kind of power that comes from truth, awareness, and emotional intelligence. This phase was the quietest and perhaps the most decisive. My every gesture was a deliberate choice. It was like sewing a delicate piece, line by line, stitch by stitch, without missing a beat. And the more I stitched this new story together, the more I felt that, for the first time in years, I was once again master of my own narrative. If you have ever experienced a situation where you had to pretend to protect your truth, write the word here in the comments. Protected intuition. Sometimes it's all we have, and all we need. As I gathered evidence and silently pondered what would become my biggest decision, memories began to surface like waves we can't contain. I saw myself there, in the present, walking quietly through a house that no longer belonged to me emotionally, but my mind insisted on taking me back to a time when everything still made sense. It was inevitable. Every corner of the house reminded me of how much sacrifice had been poured into that floor. I remembered the nights when, with my fingers already numb from sewing, I'd still come up with some excuse to keep working, because stopping meant falling behind on the mortgage payment, and falling behind meant risk, and risk, at that stage of my life, was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was just me and my son, a baby at the time, with watchful eyes and a small cry that made me forget my exhaustion. I had no one to share the bills with, much less my fears. I worked both at home and outside. During the day, I washed clothes for others, cleaned houses. At night, I stayed up all night sewing for my neighbors, making repairs, altering party dresses I would never be able to wear myself. I saved every penny. I bought every brick with the sweat that dripped from my body and soul. It wasn't just about building a house. It was about creating a safe place, where my son could grow up wanting for nothing, where I could grow old in peace. It was my dream of stability, my silent promise that he would never go through what I had. I remember when I finally signed the house papers. It was a small studio apartment, nothing special, but to me, it was a castle. I remember the thrill of hanging the first curtains, painting the walls with a borrowed roller, watching my son run down the narrow hallway as if he owned the world. And, in a way, he did, because everything I did was for him. For that boy who, now an adult, can't even look me in the eye without looking away. I kept photos, documents, letters. I have a box of drawings he made at school, those with scribbles saying, "Mommy, I love you," stuck together with crooked tape and a crumpled flower in the corner. I never threw anything away. That was proof that love once existed, that I was important once. But time is strange. It changes things, and sometimes it erases them too. Looking back, I don't regret the sacrifices. I'd do it all over again, but I'd do it differently. Maybe I'd have set more boundaries, made myself listen more, because what begins as giving can end as self-denial. And when we self-denial too much, others start to believe they have the right to silence us. During this journey, I realized how much the decisions we make in the past shape how we will be treated in the future, and how much the behind-the-scenes moments of our lives, those that no one sees, hold the greatest revelations. Sometimes, it's not a lack of love, it's a lack of memory. People forget. They forget what you did, how much you gave up, how much you fought. And perhaps that's why it's so necessary to remind not only them, but ourselves, of our history, of the silent battles, of the strength we had when there was no audience. Reliving those moments wasn't easy, but it wasn't in vain either. Because the more I remembered, the more I believed in the woman I was, and the more I felt that, behind that fragile appearance, there still lay the same strength, the same desire to protect. But now, it was no longer about protecting others at my own expense. Now, it was about protecting my dignity. If you've also sacrificed everything for someone and felt forgotten afterwards, write the phrase here in the comments. Me effort has value sometimes. That's all our hearts want to hear. It's curious how, sometimes, what hurts the most isn't the silence of others. It's the echo of what you've already experienced but no one else seems to remember. And perhaps that's why this story, intimate as it is, needs to be told. Because it's not just mine. It's about many women who, like me, gave their all and were left forgotten. So, if anything in this story has ever revolted you, if any part touched you deeply, leave a comment below about what bothered you most. Your experience may seem small, but it has the power to heal, to make others feel less alone. And if this kind of story resonates with you, if it helps you reflect, remember, and see your own journey more truthfully, like this video. It may seem like a simple gesture, but this is how YouTube understands that this content matters, that it needs to reach more people, people who may be experiencing exactly this right now. In silence. End. If you want to continue following stories that speak to the heart, that expose what's hidden behind the scenes of life, subscribe to the channel here. That's what keeps this space going, a place where memories become strength, where pain finds a voice, and where each story is treated with the respect it deserves, because what came next changed everything. I knew I couldn't just walk out of that house, neither could I scream nor confront them. That wasn't the way to go. They wouldn't recognize me even if I tore up the papers in front of them. What they needed was something that would break the comfortable logic they lived in, something that would take them off center. And that's why I chose dinner. Yes, family dinner, the same one I'd prepared so many times alone, washing the dishes while they laughed in the living room, calling me only when dessert was served. But this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't be behind the scenes, I'd be at the center of the table. The plan was ready. I had all the documents, the recordings, the evidence, but more than that, I had a sense of justice that didn't come from anger, but from truth. I spent the afternoon preparing everything as usual. I made my granddaughter's favorite dish, used the white tablecloth that had been stored away for years, and folded the napkins delicately. I knew that kind gesture would confuse them, because anyone who sets a table like that has a pure heart, right? They sat down, as always. They ate, complimented the food, and asked if I needed help, a question they'd never asked before. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just acting. I just smiled. Inside, the silence was a stage about to be lit. I waited for everyone to finish. The food, the toasts, the forced laughter. And then, calmly, I got up from my chair. I placed my napkin on the table and said, "The house has been sold." My daughter-in-law's fork clattered onto her plate. My son stopped chewing. I continued, "The new owner arrives tomorrow. And no, you are not included in the contract." The silence was piercing. None of them understood right away. They laughed, as if they thought the old woman was delirious. But then, I laid the documents on the table, the signed contract, the transferred deed, the authorization I'd arranged myself with the lawyer, who still called me Donna Louise, with respect in his eyes. I calmly explained everything. How I'd transferred the property confidentially. How I'd reserved another place for myself, with my name, my key, my space. How their entire charade of emotional dominance had crumbled. My son tried to argue. He spoke of his granddaughter, of bonds, of family. I listened, not with resentment, but with a serenity that perhaps hurt more than any scolding. Because they understood. They understood that I was never weak. that while they treated me as invisible, I was reshaping my destiny. My daughter-in-law's expression was one of pure despair. She asked where they would live, what their daughter would be like, if there was anything I could do. I said yes, that there was something I had already done. I had given them everything I could, for years, and now I was giving back to myself what they had taken from me, the right to decide my place. The impact was silent but profound. They didn't scream, they just looked at me as if, for the first time, seeing the woman behind the grandmother, and that, as sad as it was also liberating. If you ever needed to get up, even with a broken heart, write the phrase here in the comments. Me justice began in silence sometimes. The most powerful force is the one no one sees coming. The next morning, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was shocked. The kind of silence that only happens when the truth sinks in, and there's no escaping it. I got up early, as always. I made my coffee and sipped it slowly, gazing out the window at the trees I'd planted so many years ago. The morning light touched the furniture with a melancholy softness, almost as if it were saying goodbye from me. They were still asleep when the truck arrived. There was no fuss, no rush. Everything was already arranged. The furniture was removed one by one, carefully packed, like pieces of a story I was ready to leave behind. And, ironically, each piece of furniture that left felt like it carried with it a weight I'd carried for too long. My daughter-in-law was the first to come down. Her eyes were still puffy with sleep, confused. It took her a few seconds to understand what was happening. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice almost hoarse. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the uniformed men, who were still carefully packing the furniture. "Where are they going?" she insisted. And I, with the calmness of someone who no longer needed to prove anything, said, "Where they belong, with me." My son appeared soon after. His face was drawn, his words halting. He looked around the now nearly empty room and finally understood that this was no longer his home. And more than that, he understood that the mother he'd thought controllable had awakened. There was no argument, there was no shouting. There was only the weight of a silence that said it all. The law of return is like this. It arrives without warning, without spectacle, but with unfailing precision. They tried to talk. They offered hasty apologies, empty justifications. They spoke of regret, of family, of reconsidering. But the time, 4 words, had passed. What remained now were the facts. And the facts could no longer be undone. They had nowhere to go. They had no plans, no support network, because they had cut their ties. And I had everything. I had a new home, a new chance, a story rewritten with courage and dignity. I closed the door firmly, not angry. The same door that had once excluded me was now mine again, and in that simple gesture, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom, a peaceful feeling, as if I had returned home to myself. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was mental, in the understanding that dignity isn't begged for, it's built, and when necessary, it's defended. The journey didn't erase the scars, but it gave me the strength to look at them with pride. Each one told a story of resistance, of unrequited love, of difficult choices. And now, they all took on new meaning. The impact of that decision echoed, for a long time, not only within the house, but within me. It was there that I realized the true value of my presence. It wasn't about furniture or walls. It was about what I represented, about everything I gave, and about what I decided, ultimately, to rescue. If this part of the story touched something deep within you, write the phrase here in the comments. I closed the door firmly. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-love is knowing when it's time to leave and when it's time to come back. Peace has a different sound when it arrives after the storm. It's a fuller, denser silence, a kind of silence that doesn't hurt, it just weighs a little in the corners of the house. In the early days, I would wake up early as usual, make my coffee, open the window, and wait to hear my granddaughter's little runs down the hallway. But all that came was the wind. And sometimes, the distant sound of a memory. The new house was smaller, but it was mine. I bought it with part of the value of the old one. I carefully saved the rest. I wanted something simple, with no memories stuck to the walls, no marks of neglect on the furniture. I chose each object with intention. A small but soft sofa, an armchair that would embrace me at the end of the day, a light curtain that let the sun in. It wasn't about material comfort. It was about rebuilding, piece by piece, the meaning of home. But the truth is, As free as I felt, there was a void that couldn't be ignored. The price of my decision didn't come only in silence, it came in the form of absence. I no longer saw my granddaughter, and she no longer saw me. I don't know what they told her. I don't know if they said I left of my own free will, or if they erased my image with other words. I only know that, in that house, where I was once a pillar of support, there was now a history that excluded me. And yes, it hurts in a strange way, because it's not a sharp pain. It's an absence that slowly weighs on you. Like when you go looking for something in the closet and realize it's gone. Like when you hear a children's song and your chest tightens before you can reason why. Even so, I'd do it all over again, because, deep down, I didn't lose a granddaughter. I just stopped harboring an illusion. One that said if I held on just a little longer, maybe they'd see me again. And I was tired of waiting for the recognition that never came. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love is walking away. It's not allowing others' memories of you to be built on humiliations silently accepted. My journey of transformation wasn't just about reclaiming a house, it was about reclaiming myself. About understanding that love shouldn't come at the expense of dignity. That every story has the right to change course, even when change is costly. I chose to pay this price because I understood that freedom, true freedom, is never cheap, but it is always fair. Now, I walk the streets with a different outlook. I still miss it, but it's not home. It's the innocence I lost. The blind faith I had in bonds that, deep down, only existed on one side. And yet, this longing doesn't destroy me, because it also reminds me of how much I've grown. If you ever had to choose between love and respect, and had the courage to choose the latter, write the phrase here in the comments. Me silence saved me some times. It is in this that our true strength is born. Ultimately, everyone carries their own story, and if mine touched you in any way, if it brought up memories, reflections, or just that silence that says more than any words, then this conversation was worth it. If you've stuck with me this far, leave a comment. This message was for me, so I know who walked with me until the end of this journey. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you believe that voices like mine deserve to be heard, subscribe to the channel. This is where I share experiences that many try to hide, but that need to be told. And if at any point you felt this narrative was yours too, leave a like, not as a mechanical gesture, but as a sign that this connection has been made. And before you go, there's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there, because some stories only make sense when we listen to the end.